Monica, the president just addressed all this at his press conference in the UK moments ago. Remind us what he said.
Yeah, and overnight, Anna, he did celebrate this news when it broke. He was issuing a message late in the hours after that state banquet where he was in the UK, and he reiterated that today, saying that he was happy to see this news. Here's exactly what he said, and we could talk about it more on the other side.
Jimmy Kimmel was fired because he had bad ratings more than anything else, and he said a horrible thing about a great gentleman known as Charlie Kirk. And Jimmy Kimmel is not a talented person. He had very bad ratings, and they should have fired him a long time ago. So, you can call that free speech or not. He was fired for lack of talent.
So to be very clear, Anna, Jimmy Kimmel wasn't actually fired or terminated. His show has been pulled indefinitely as they are figuring out those next steps that you were just discussing. But the president is trying to frame this as something that he wants to take some credit on. And as you have also just been talking about, this is something that he had floated for a long time. Certainly when he rejoiced after the cancellation of Stephen Colbert's show, he actually wrote that Jimmy Kimmel was next and saying that other late night hosts could potentially be facing the same kind of fate. And this is something, again, that he and the FCC have talked about repeatedly, this idea of pulling licenses and of pressuring potentially these stations to make these kinds of decisions. So you do have politics entering this very real business world where they are making these kinds of decisions. But it also is the introduction and the collision of this concept of free speech that the president is saying and referring to here when his administration, since the assassination of Charlie Kirk, has been having this conversation about free speech, about protecting it. But you had the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, who had to walk back some comments about going after hate speech because she essentially said and didn't account for what free speech would be included there for people who express their opinions. But this has clearly been something that they have been discussing repeatedly behind the scenes and that the president is likely to continue to tout, even though, again, we should repeat that Jimmy Kimmel wasn't fired, and it is unclear whether he could come back in some capacity.
David, what do you make of what we're hearing from the president in the wake of this apparent media crackdown here at home?
This is part of a long-running now argument between the right and the left over free speech, and the right, particularly during the Biden administration, felt victimized. They felt that toward the end of the 2020 campaign, in fact, when Trump was still president, that media companies self-censored reporting that had to do with information about Hunter Biden that would have been detrimental to President Biden's campaign. They felt aggrieved that the Biden administration was focused on misinformation about COVID and trying to sort of strong-arm media companies and platforms not to carry certain information. And of course, therefore, President Trump runs on this idea that he's going to restore free speech. And now he is celebrating after the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, that he oversees, in a sense, appears to have coerced ABC into pulling Kimmel off the air because they made it both uncomfortable for ABC, but also advantageous for Nexstar as it tries to gain administration approval for a merger. And I think we need to be clear.
Which sounds a lot like what happened with CBS as Paramount was trying to do that business deal.
Correct. But I think this is a lot more blatant. My point about raising what happened at the tail end of the 2020 campaign and during the Biden administration is that conservatives were complaining and felt as though they were being targeted and having their freedom of speech infringed upon. And now we're seeing a swinging of the pendulum where an administration whose president ran on restoring freedom of speech, whose supporters and top officials all said that they were going to bring back this idea that the First Amendment is sacrosanct, are now, in a sense, engaged in the same project, at least according to people on the center left. And they have a good case to make, as in some instances, people on the right had a good case to make as it related to what came before. And so politically, I wonder if we're going to see, particularly what is because of what has happened over the past 10 days or so, if we're going to see people on the right and the left collaborate to try and protect this idea that the government shouldn't be influencing. Obviously, Jimmy Kimmel doesn't have a right to an ABC late night talk show. ABC has the right to fire him, but it's the issue of government coercion and censorship that we're talking about here. And there is some uncomfortability on the right. I'm wondering if we're going to see more of it.
Right. We're talking about, questions about censorship, questions about steering content, what are supposed to be these independent media organizations. And the reaction is coming in from all sides. Monica, in fact, just in the last few minutes, former President Obama called out Kimmel's show being pulled off the air. And he writes, quote, after years of complaining about cancel culture, the current administration has taken it to a new and dangerous level by routinely threatening regulatory action against media companies unless they muzzle or fire reporters and commentators it doesn't like. And of course, again, Kimmel has not been fired, but he is no longer on air at this time. I understand we also heard from the FCC chairman this morning. What is he saying?
Yeah, and his role in all of this is really critical. He was an author of the FCC section of Project 2025. He has been very critical of what he calls liberal biases on some of these networks. He has investigated and talked about complaints specifically at some of these networks, including ABC. And he was asked earlier today specifically about this on CNBC. Here's what he had to say.
We're reinvigorating the FCC's enforcement of public interest. And it's a good thing. I mean, look, trust in the media is at an all-time low. It used to be more trusted than Congress, at least they could say, but now they've fallen beneath Congress. I think, gas station sushi probably polls better in terms of trust than the legacy broadcast media right now.
And two more interesting points from that interview, Anna. He was also asked about potential future action for other networks or other late night hosts. And Brendan Carr did say we're not done yet. He didn't specify exactly what that meant, but he predicts more changes, he said, in the media ecosystem. And he was also asked on CNBC if he believes that this is a situation where somehow the FCC or some other entity would need to review or approve words that are spoken by television hosts in advance. And in response to that, he said no.